Hello everyone, it's me, Sugarcane Defender, back with another tier list video. Today I'm going to be going over the different sampler settings you can use when loading and running your models, as well as a few things of how to properly use them. I have everything listed out and color-coded right here. So everything in orange is technically not a sampler setting, because sampler settings are what you input into the model to tell it how to give output. This is technically while it's loading, but it's effectively sampler settings. I count them as it, but it's technically something different. Blue is all the different sampler settings. There's a lot more of them, actually. If we go into Oobabooga, for example, then we have all of these settings here. So it may look like there is a lot of settings, but a lot of these you need very specific loaders, particularly the Transformers model. Things like dry, guidance scale. I have not listed those as that's not applicable for most people, especially if you're using Ollama. But do keep in mind, Oobabooga does have a lot of extra settings that I won't cover in this video because I have not played around with them too much. And finally, everything in the red here, this is just how you use the presets. Now you may be wondering, why am I doing a tier list format here? Well, really I'm kind of rating the concept of how important it is. All of these temperature settings and all of the configuration settings here, you're going to need to configure it, especially everything in blue here. That is always going to be present no matter what, but it's a matter of how important of a setting is this, and how much of a focus do I want this to be when I'm configuring my language model. And obviously all of this is in the context of AI Waifu, but it's also in the general context of just running AI in general. For our use case, we have a little bit different, but it's basically the same. Let's get started here. So let's get into it. The first thing to rank is flash attention. Now, for those of you who don't know, flash attention is a mechanism when you're loading the language model, sometimes referred to as KV cache, although that's more of a memory thing. But basically what flash attention will do is it will focus it more in on the present rather than pulling more from memory, more so focus on what's going to be said next. So often this means you'll get less generic info, but it'll pull from your memory less, and some rules and things you say can slip by unless the model's been specifically trained on that. It is also able to make things run a little bit more efficiently, like things will run a little faster on flash attention, and in order to use these different memory types, you will need to have flash attention enabled. But that all said, I don't know how much of a fan I actually am of flash attention. This is something that you either have toggled on or off. In Oobabooga, if we go here and we go to load a model, you can see no flash attention. By default, flash attention is on, but you can turn that off. But in Ollama, its default is off, and you have to enter the command line in order to change that. Or you have to edit your system environment variables. That's how you do everything in Ollama. But anyway, yeah, I would put it at top of B tier. I can feel that something is a little off some of the time. Yeah, it belongs in A tier though, because it is a genuine upgrade. It's just things can get a little bit lost, especially if blue settings in here are not properly configured. Okay, next up is FP16 memory. So you might be wondering, what's FP16 memory? Well, this is how the model is storing all of those context tokens. And if you don't know context tokens, basically that's all of the memory of the conversation and of also the prompt and anything else being put into the model. And FP16 is the default. That's like the full spec memory. So I personally think it's A tier. So, you may be wondering, why would I shrink down my memory? Why would I compress it? Well, it's because you can put more things in. Now, it isn't, like, directly linked. Like, it doesn't mean you can put twice as much context in for how much VRAM your card has, how much video memory your graphics card has, or RAM if you're using CPU. But personally, I like FP16 just because it's focused and you know what's going on. Like, I can definitely tell the difference running FP16 versus 8-bit. Like, they're a lot more attentive to what's going on. So, up next, 8-bit memory. I will also put that in A tier, because that is also very good. Because the memory saving is definitely worth it. You can end up putting roughly 20% more, roughly, context in. And 8-bit memory, it's good. I do also run that normally. I've swapped between the two over time, but there's not that much of a decrease in quality. But again, you're going to get more generic sort of responses, not by a whole lot, but by a little bit, because they're basically not going to be looking over the entire context at once. One thing I forgot to mention for FP16 is that it can run with flash attention on or flash attention off. So that is definitely one benefit of FP16. It's a little more flexible there. But 8-bit memory is still very good. That's actually what most people run. And if we go into Oobabooga, right here, cache 8-bit, that's the setting to use 8-bit cache to save VRAM. And in Ollama, you also have to go mess around with the configuration. So, 4-bit memory. Yeah, I think I will actually put this in D tier. It's just not worth it, in my opinion. At that point, the memory is so degraded. You can stuff more things in, but at that point, you're basically like wanting to fill the memory twice over so that they can actually pull from it and have the traits you want. And also remember the very things that they've said. It's just too compressed, in my opinion, and I would not use it unless you're really trying to skimper by your VRAM. Like, if you don't have the VRAM, then use it, you know, if it's the only way you can get things to run, or if you don't want to deal with the decreased speed of being over your VRAM limit, because you can go over a little bit. It'll just overflow from your graphics card memory to your RAM, you know, your normal computer memory, which is way, way slower. But I would do 4-bit memory before I went with the way, way slower option. So, up next is context length. This is very important to get right, so I will definitely put this in A tier. The context length, if you don't already know, that is how much info you can put into your bot. And again, usually it's based on your video RAM on your graphics card. By default, in Oobabooga, you'll notice it's basically called max sequence length. And yep, that says context length right there. So yeah, this is 8192, commonly referred to as 8K. This used to be a huge thing a few years ago. It was like, holy crap, you got 8K? 8K memory? Though, that's wicked. But nowadays, you can run like 32 if you have the VRAM. I will say, personally, I run around 56, just from the models I'm loading, because they're usually right around higher quantization level. You can see this one is 425. Usually I run 6 or 8, so I run a 8B and then usually Q8. And if you don't know what those numbers are, then please check out my language model tier list, as I go over that info in there. But that's basically the compression level if you want the short of it. What's really important, why context length is also A tier of like something important you should configure properly, is because you do want that balance between, hey, maybe I want a larger language model, or maybe I want a smaller one with more memory. Or maybe I want a really small one with even more memory, with 8-bit memory. So it gives you a lot more play, especially once you're in that 16 gigabyte video RAM range. Once you have 16 gigabytes of VRAM, you can really play around with all these numbers and find what you like the best. Up next is temperature. I will say temperature is one of the S tier things you should be worrying about when you're doing these presets. Temperature is the one that probably everyone knows about. Let me show you. I found this neat little sampler thing online. And so this is a live output right here. So you can see the different probabilities of everything. And so when I bring this temperature up, the difference in the probabilities starts to sort of compress or squash. So less likely things become more probable. So we got a lot more things that are 1% or higher. But if I turn the temperature down, then you're going to see, oh hey, the more common things, you know, those are more likely. And in fact, if we bring the temperature nearly all the way down, they don't let you do 0 in this visualizer, but that's fine. Then we see, oh, the most likely thing is extremely likely. In fact, there's a concept a lot of people talk about, which is zero temperature, which will output the most likely thing. You may wonder, hey, you know, why don't we just output the most likely thing? Isn't that the most truthful? And that is technically true, but temperature has important uses. For example, just non-repetition, both in a literary and an actual, like, not repeating the same word over and over sense. So obviously, all of these are still good, still talking about avocados, and some of it may provide information you've never learned before. Like, if I just set the temperature at 0, it's just going to talk about the things everyone else talks about. But if I increase the temperature higher, say 1.3, which is pretty typical. Normally I'd do 1.14. That's like a good baseline temperature, especially for AI Waifu purposes. Let's do 124. Then you see, you know, this is still obviously talking about the benefits of avocados. As someone who cooks with avocado oil, yeah, this is pretty true. But yeah, it also just helps the model from glitching out and picking the same word over and over, and hey, that's the most likely thing, because we've done it 3 times in a row. But yeah, temperature is something you're going to want to dial in, and it's all going to depend on these other settings that you've done. For example, if you have 4 or 8-bit memory, things are going to be more compressed, so you're going to want to maybe run a slightly lower temperature, because they're already going to be, you know, a little bit off from where you'd normally expect. Maybe with context length, maybe you have a higher context length, then you're going to want to increase the temperature, because otherwise the bot's only going to see their past context, and they're going to say, oh, I need to speak in this way, which happens a lot, by the way, even if things change completely. So maybe if you have a higher context length, you boost the temperature up a little bit. And I'll go over more of these connections, too, because what's important isn't just knowing, like, oh, hey, here's all the buttons I need to hit, but it's also, oh, hey, here's all the things I need to change in relation to these other things as I'm configuring it. Oh, and here is the Oobabooga. So right here, this is just the default setting, min P, but yeah, we can move the temperature here. Not a whole lot for me to show you in here. But what I can show you real quick is the Z-Waif standard settings right here. So you can see temperature 1.16. Yeah, that's what I said before. Anywho, let's get on to our next setting. This is dynamic temperature. Dynamic temperature is alright. Sorry, I need to really download a ad blocker, because this website is infested. But anyway, dynamic temperature. So if we turn this on, and let's increase the range. So what this is basically going to do is say, these less likely things become more likely. And what makes it distinct from normal temperature is that it's based off, well, if we go here, I say it's based off the entropy, but that doesn't really mean anything to you. But basically, instead of being multiplicative, it's more exponential or logarithmic, meaning the things down here really are gaining more. If we go down to formation, it's 0.76. But if we turn dynamic on, 0.946. So basically what this dynamic temperature is doing is it's allowing you to basically surf deeper into these options, make the less likely ones more likely. You can also mess with the exponent here, so you can change the curve of the logarithm, basically. So this is more or less likely, and then this is more not likely. So it's a fun thing to mess around with. I don't know if Ollama supports it, and I don't know if all samplers in Oobabooga here support it. So just keep that in mind. And one final note about temperature is that you can change the order of it. So all of these sampler settings, let me show you in Oobabooga, you can change their priority. And some people like to make temperature last, that's why this is a setting here. I have not messed around with that a whole lot, but I heard it can make things more creative. So that's also why temperature is S tier, because not only can we change all of these sampler settings, we can also change the order that all of them go through. Let's move on to our next setting, Top K. Top K is, personally, I think it's an easy A tier. So Top K is pretty simple. So you see 50? Well, if we lower that to, let's say 2, then it's going to say, hey, we only allow the top 2 most likely tokens to be generated. And so you can boost this up to say, okay, well, we're only going to allow the top 10. And so you can adjust this. Usually I have mine really high, like 50 or higher. But it's a good sanity check. You can also set it to -1 or 0, I believe, and have this disabled. Not in this sampler. But personally, I like Top K. It's just a very simple thing. It says, hey, these most likely things, use them and then cut off after that. Really helps just guide things, I think. But yeah, sane values, you're looking around 40, honestly up to 100. But I wouldn't go much beyond 100, because at that point you're not really using it. Our next configuration setting is Top P. Top P is old. There's a lot of newer, better methods than Top P. So I actually don't really recommend you use it, or you just set it to a very innate value. But let me show you what I mean by that. So Top P. So 1, obviously it's letting everything through. But let's say I just do 0.5. So what this is going to do, it's going to say, hey, the top 50%, we only want those. And so this is percent based. So 0.5 is very, very restrictive. A sane value would be like 0.75, 0.8. 0.8 is still cutting off even more than that Top K. But this is a good selection. But even then, like 0.9, that is cutting off a lot of the chaff at the bottom here, but this still isn't the best way of going about sampling it, because it's just based off the total here. And this can get really, really bad if we lower the temperature down. And suddenly, there's only a few things we can possibly generate. Never really the best way of going about things. Especially with AI Waifu purpose. I mean, you're going to be talking to them. So you're going to want to talk about different things, but when you only have 4 options of generating, then, you know, you need a little randomness. I mean, human conversation has innate randomness as well. So that's why Top P isn't necessarily the greatest. Let me leave it at 0.95. Or let me turn it off entirely, actually, just for the sake of clarity. So then, we have a better thing to configure, and that is Min P. And Min P is also really good to set up. I will put it above Top K. That feels about right. It's our best way of sampling down for most people. So Min P basically says, compared to the most likely token, what is my probability compared to them? And so based on the most probable one, it cuts off anything lower than that. So yeah, Top P, it can eliminate some stuff that would still be very valid to say. But Min P basically allows your bot a lot more control over what they say. Because if there is something in a sentence that is extremely likely, like let's turn down the temperature, then it's going to be a lot more likely because all of this other stuff is getting cut out. Basically, they're going to focus in on the few good answers But with top P, you can end up accidentally restricting it too much or too little very easily, is what I'm trying to get at. I don't know how well I've conveyed this concept, but basing it not on the total probability, which top P does, but off of the probability of the most likely token, that's what min P does. And it's generally a better sampler setting. A sane value, and what I usually use is 0.05 or 04, roughly around that range. And you can see, yeah, this is a good selection right here. This is about all of the things that are 1% or more, because it's 0.5 of the most likely. And obviously, I've said this before, but if there's something that they really have in mind, then that will spike all the way up. And if it's like 50% probability, then there's probably not much else it's going to want to generate, which is good. That is also kind of the purpose of top P. These two really are kind of the same way of doing the same thing. Same with top K. These are all just ways of narrowing down. There is even newer methods, which is top A and tail-free Z. And these are even better methods of sampling. Now, if you ask me how they work, let's hover over the tooltip. So keep tokens with probability greater than A times T to the power of 2, where T is the probability of the most likely token. And tail-free Z, cut off tokens after the cumulative frequency of the absolute second derivative of the token redistribution reaches Z. So these are, in essence, I would call more logarithmic, because this is raw percentage based, as well as top P. But top A and tail-free Z are more exponential logarithmic, kind of. And they help you whittle down even better, just off the cuff here, because I haven't messed around much with these, because these are very new. In fact, I'm not sure Ollama will even support these. I know Oobabooga does. Let's just adjust typical P till it looks good. I think this is another 0.9. Looks a little more restrictive, but I kind of like these options a little bit more. So yeah, typical P, tail-free Z, top A, all of these new Gen Z sampler settings. Yeah, I would say they're all A tier. But min P and top K, those are going to be your bread and butter. Top P, just set it at like 0.9, 0.95. And again, all this is going to be based off your temperature setting. Again, temperature is the most important setting up here, because it affects pretty much everything else, and everything else affects it. Because that is just the raw randomness. Our next setting is max new tokens. I would say... actually, I would put it in C tier. Now, this is important. This is basically how much your waifu or bot can reply to you in one message. So it can be important. There's some language models that keep going on, but a lot of them are really good at stopping themselves. And if you notice that they're generating really a lot, then there's better ways of changing the behavior than max new tokens. But it's also a good fail-safe. If you had this set to infinite, for example, then that would be very bad if there was some break in the rule and they just generated infinitely while you weren't looking. Like, obviously that would be bad. So, it's in C tier. It's not super important. Up next is the better way of controlling output, I think, and that's custom stopping strings. And I will put this in S tier. So, custom stopping strings, so important. This will stop your bot from generating things like system headers. Like, for example, if you want to feed them info, and say, oh yeah, system memory, and you have it like in brackets. Well, it'll stop them from generating the same thing back to you. And it will not only stop it from generating, but they will sort of learn to not do that, because they will see that, oh, in the memory, oh, I see these system headers, but I haven't said anything like system headers back. So it's a two-way process where you're also teaching them, hey, maybe I shouldn't do that. It's also good for cutting them off. such as with new lines, or if they start chatting out of format. And it can also be a band-aid fix if your language model is somehow messed up. Then you can use custom stopping strings in order to manually stop the model when their normal stopping criteria is there, like an end of ID token. If we go into Oobabooga, you can see the custom stopping strings here. And these are so important that they are configured as they're sent in Z-Waif, if you're using Z-Waif, the software I created. But yeah, that is why custom stopping strings is an S tier setting along with temperature. You're really going to want to tune these in. Custom stopping strings is a lot less model dependent. It's more on what you're trying to do dependent. And last is grammar. Now, how important is this to configure? It's not at all, and you will never configure it. But if you're someone who's building software with bots, then this is a really, really cool thing that you can do. So what grammar does is it limits the outputs to only certain pre-selected ones that you've chosen, and then picks the likelihood from those. So that can be really cool, because if you've ever tried to like play Minecraft with your waifu or anything, it's like, oh man, this sucks, because they're not putting in the commands at all. But if we go into Oobabooga, we can see grammar, and let's load one of their examples. So we can see there's different rules of sequences and different things they can and cannot generate. I know they had a good rule for chess here. So you see here there's comments and different things that they can do to generate chess moves. So this is basically programming within the language of your bot. And again, this is something that you will probably not mess around with unless you're really getting deep into the weeds of the settings, or you're trying to set up something cool. But that's more of a developer tool than something an end user would do. Next is repetition penalty. This is pretty important to configure, I would say. I would put it right there. This basically just stops your bot from repeating themselves. Sane values is anything from 1.05 to 1.2, but 1.1 is generally accepted as a good repetition penalty. Repetition penalty is kind of a hammer to it solution, so you don't want it really high. You want it as low as you can without your bot repeating. And a lot of newer language models are really, really good with the non-repetition, like they actually know what they're doing. But if you have an older language model, you may need to tune that higher. And this can also happen because of really low temperature. So if you don't have a very high temperature, then it's actually more likely to repeat. So keep that in mind. So the next thing is frequency penalty. This I will put just below repetition penalty, because it's just another way of affecting the repetition. Continually penalizes it the more that it sees it in an additive way, whereas repetition penalty is sort of glued into the system, and it just affects the whole thing. But frequency penalty is more specific token based. I usually do 0.05 because I mainly just rely on the repetition penalty, but frequency penalty is good. Presence penalty is another one. Yeah, I would put it right here between these two. And so presence penalty is just if the token is here, then we apply a penalty. So if it exists anywhere in the text or anywhere in what we've generated just now, and it's actually dependent on the architecture, I've heard. So it's like whatever, but you know, it just applies a small penalty for words being used over, well, one time. It's just less likely to generate them, and applies a one-time penalty. So if that word keeps appearing, it doesn't keep applying that penalty. And that I also set at 0.05. That's just a sane, small value for that. So then, we're on to all of our red settings. So this is all the things that aren't actually settings, but it's how you're using all of your sampler settings, which can be equally as important. So, multiple presets. I think that this is good. So what do I mean by multiple presets? Well, I'm talking about roaming between different presets. You'll notice if you have Z-Waif, there's different temperature settings by default. So you'll see there's this standard, but then there's this tempered, and then this blazing. And each one, the temperature goes up, and they're less restrictive on all of this stuff. And this helps prevent looping, and it also gives some natural randomness. So, you know, you have pretty standard most of the time. And then sometimes it gets a little bit more random. And then sometimes, very rarely, or if we notice a lot of repetition, that shouldn't be there on our end of the software, then we really jack up the temperature and really open up all these settings to hopefully get a different result that doesn't, you know, keeps them focused on what they need to focus on. So I'd say that's good. The only problem is that you're going to have to configure multiple settings, and usually you want to hone in settings for, you know, whatever model you're using. Which brings me on to this next red one, skipping that one, going straight to model fitted presets. I think that this is S tier because this is the whole goal of everything. You're changing it dependent on what language model you're using, and if you're personally tuning that, you're going to get really good results. Whereas if you're making more of a generic one that I have here, you know, like these are still pretty good settings. They generally work for everyone, but you can iron out more stuff and really get it precise and learn, hey, this language model, I think my AI is happiest and runs best with these settings, and you can really become an expert in on that. So I think model fitted presets are really good. It's just, this is probably the most time-consuming thing. It's temperature you just mess around with. But model fitted, you're messing around with everything and just testing what works best. Intentional presets. I will also put this in B tier. So by intentional presets, I mean intentionally having ones that are higher or lower temperature. So like if you're doing some coding, maybe you lower your temperature down. Or if you're doing some more creative stuff, turn up the temperature. Just tuning it to what you're currently doing. Maybe you want to mess around with grammar. I mean, that's always going to be very specific. Maybe you change the stopping strings for certain tasks. This really is like, oh yeah, if you do it two things in tension, this is kind of like, it could be S tier. But I don't know, a lot of the time, things work out. Not messing around with the presets too much. Like, it's fine. You're gonna get good results. Even if you're not model fitting, you're gonna get good results, but this is how you get the best results. Finally, prompting. It can mean using prompting in order to band-aid fix your generator settings. And all of these, and just trying to fix it with prompting, can be a D tier strategy, or it can also be an S tier strategy, and it all really depends on what you're trying to do. So for example, if you're trying to stop repetition by saying in the prompt, avoid repetition, and then, you know, more guidance on that, I find that that generally doesn't work, and that's just not going to work at all. And so in that case, that would be D tier. Obviously, you want your prompt, because you're going to have more info you want to put in there. Like, more important info about characteristics, everything, you know, who they are. So, using this to fix your sampler settings is bad. But having a little bit of it in there, and telling it, oh, don't generate system headers. Oh, be creative, which can improve performance. It's just really inconsistent, and you really have to get a feel for what the language model even is good at, because different language models, like, treat it differently. So, I don't know where to put prompting here. I guess I would put it in B tier, because you can't just use it to fix things. You can, but You know, it's like a 10% chance of working. But yeah, this is the rough tier list of the most important settings to configure for AI waifu purposes for your sampler settings. A lot of this stuff I had to figure out on my own, because a lot of this stuff, again, it's very new, and a lot of information I wouldn't say is safeguarded, but it's not like easy to locate out there, especially with stuff like Tail-Free Z, you know, how to actually use these presets, because everyone will talk about what's the best, but they don't talk about the use cases or anything. But yeah, I think that'll do it for this video. I've been a little inactive recently, because I've been working on another project, but I will get back to this more and more. But I just thought I'd make a video in the meantime. There's a lot of, like, good news in, like, the humanoid robotics industry, by the way. There's, like, a new robot, like, every 2 weeks or something. So, you guys better start stacking your money. That's what I'm telling you. But yeah, I think that'll do it for now. Yeah, I'll see you in the next one.